All right, I think we're ready to go. Welcome to this Hangouts on Air session on audiences. My name is Martin Rammel, and I'm an audience specialist localized here in Stockholm, Sweden. So for the next 20-30 minutes, I'm going to take you through some best practices in how we work with a field that we like to call audiences. And the agenda for these 30 minutes will follow up with a short Q&A, so you can happily post some questions in the group chat, and I'll take you through them in the end. So the agenda is basically we're going to go through some about what this field that we call audiences is all about. How does it work? How does the sort of functionality work within the Google ecosystem, and primarily around search. And today we'll look into some tactics that you'll be able to apply directly after this session, and you'll be able to get a good view on some of the products. And by the end, I'll give you a couple of recommendations, both in terms of product, but also in terms of how to think beyond today and into the future in this field. And then the Q&A. So let's get started. So just to give you some context into what this field audiences is all about. So my job here at Google is basically to help companies around how they think about their customers and to get to know their customers better. Because if they do that, they will have a good competitive edge towards their competitors, both in how they communicate with their own customer base, but also how they will be able to reach new ones in a smart way, both in terms of bidding, but also in terms of creative and what to say to whom, basically. So this is what it's all about. And in order to sort of go into the sort of the audience term, it's basically to connect data or make use of data in the Google ecosystem to make informed choices. And it all makes sense because when we've been doing some internal research on thousands of accounts, we can see that if you use audiences in combination with automated bidding and non-last click attribution, we see that accounts get plus 27% increase in conversions. And this is seen across the board. It's starting to become a best practice in how you work with attribution, audiences, and automation, given that they are all sort of tied together neatly. And I believe that there's been another session on automated bidding as well, which takes you through a bit on how automated bidding takes audiences into consideration. I'll be touching upon that later here as well. And breaking down audiences a bit, it basically comes down to three buckets. So firstly, what you know about who people are, basically their identity. Could be something on their demographics, or what they like to watch, or their sort of affinity interests. It could also be an insight from your CRM database. So if they are a customer or if they've been a customer in the past. The other bucket is intent. So what do they want? And usually advertisers get that information from website data. So from Google Analytics, you can see sort of where people has been on your site and what they've been doing, how they've interacted with your offerings. And then you get a sense of sort of what their intent is. And the third bucket, which is intelligence. How can we predict what the users will do going forward? This could be doing your own LTV analysis, looking into prediction modeling in more advanced cases. But it could also be to use machine learning models and similar products that make use of machine learning, like similar audiences or lookalike audiences here at Google. So there are a bunch of ways to work within these three buckets. But in order to understand what audiences is or how we break it down, I would say that it's identity, from intent, or from more intelligent systems. And we'll be going through some products knitting into them today. And just to provide an example as we go through this. So imagine that you will have 3 different users searching for the same query. So in this instance, it will be car loan. So all of these 3 people that you see here on the screen, they search for car loan. And for you to be able to make a decision who out of these 3 would be most valuable for you or is more likely to convert, you would need some type of data input. And this could be, let's see if I can switch. Yeah. This could be, for instance, the female on the left. You know that they are in your CRM system, that they are segmented as a high-value customer. They might have purchased, or she has purchased something for the last 30 days. And if you know that, then you can make an informed decision on how to treat her with your marketing communications. Same with the guy in the middle. He has been viewing your product, or in this case, the car loan product, the last 7 days. He is also in a segment called in-market segment, which is a Google audience that you all are able to use off the bat. And he is interested in car loans, according to Google. And then we have the lady on the right, who we have no data on. So Google has no data, and you as an advertiser has no data. And this is a pretty good example to showcase that all queries are created unequally. So you need to use audiences to sort of get behind the keyword. And as keywords has been used in the past for paid search, now we need to use more data as automation gets increasingly important, and the decision making, it's all about sort of what data you put in there, and that is audiences. Taking this example again for the car loan, if you want to see sort of how it works at Google search. So imagine here we have a representation of 20 people searching for car loans. And you are competing against your competitors for the top 3 spots here in this example. And how you categorize these queries are basically, if, for example, if they are your current customers, if they are hot leads and have visited your sites previously, or if they are prospects that maybe Google says that these guys are interested in car loans from our pattern data. And then you will be able to inform your bidding or your creative with what to say to these people, given how you categorize them. So this is sort of how it works in Google search when you use an audience. And we'll go through, start going through RLSA, which is remarketing list for search ads, which is sort of the one of the easiest ways of engaging website visitors and reach them on Google search. And to give you some numbers on what we've been seeing for companies using audiences versus if they don't use any audiences at all, we see a good uplift in engagement numbers. And this might not be a big surprise, given that, I mean, if you have data on your users, then you know sort of when and how to engage them. So for RLSA audiences, we see a big uplift in click-through rate and conversion rates, given that you act on an insight of what they have been doing on your site. And in contrast, similar audiences, which is our lookalike segments, they have a bit lower uplift, but that's also because the intent signals is weaker. Those are audiences that Google classifies as similar behavior to your RLSA lists. Oops, sorry, got to Hey Google. All right, now I'm back. Where was I? Yeah, similar audiences. There is also numbers of uplift there. And there is a best practice for how to segment your audiences, and we're going to be going through 3 tactics today in this session, starting with RLSA, then going to in-market segment, which is basically our research segments, how Google categorizes people researching, and then lastly similar audiences, which is a bit more upper funnel, as you can see in this representation, and that's because we are looking into similar behaviors as your RLSA lists, but those might be totally unaware of your brand or your site. Just get some water. But we start with RLSA. And I just wanted to go through a bit how the mechanics work behind RLSA, which is basically remarketing. It all starts with you tagging your site, so you are allowed to collect user cookies and user data. And the visitor comes to your site, and then that triggers an action for you to put that user into one of your user lists, your audience list. When the user then leaves and maybe go to Google search within the next couple of days or so and start searching for one of your keywords, then you'll be able to act on that data that you collected by adjusting your bids or by adjusting your creative. And that's basically how RLSA works. And it's important to notice that nowadays you need to collect data with consent. And Google has some best practices on this. Going into cookiechoices.org allows you to see some a perspective on how Google views this, and recommends a couple of vendors who provide services for collecting data with consent, and sort of the mechanics around what questions you need to ask and how to collect consent, basically data with consent. So please note down cookiechoices.org and have a visit to learn more. Now, segmenting an audience can be tricky. I usually go back to the mission statement that I have in order to sort of get this right, usually. And that's, if by starting with your customer journey or your purchase journey throughout your site, and use that as a starting point for how to segment your audiences. And that usually looks like you segment all your visitors that comes to your site. You could categorize down to category page, so car loans or private leasing or what other categories you might have. Then further down the funnel, you might have specific products or events that are tied to higher intent. So basically, if somebody's asked for a quota, then of course it's down to the checkout process, and if somebody has converted, you know that they've become a customer. And this is a good best practice for starting to segment your audience lists, and that's in the prerequisite to having tagged your site properly with a global site tag. And a best practice setup for remarketing or RLSA is to keep the list large. And this best practice comes from when you are using automated bidding, for instance, enhanced CPC or smart bidding, which is target ROAS or target CPA. The automated bidding will take cookie, the timestamp into consideration. So you no longer have to segment your audience lists per time interval. In the past, our best practices used to be that you segment each step into, for example, 1 to 7 days, 7 to 30 days, 30 days to 60 days, and so forth. But now, with automated bidding, you only need to build large lists, and the automation will take care of that scale. You can also now apply the audiences on campaign level, and this is good for for instance, when you are creating new ad groups, you don't miss out on adding your audiences, because adding them on campaign level will sort of take care of all the new ad groups that you might create. And another best practice, which will save your time and your a lot of hassle, is to activate this with smart bidding. And smart bidding is target ROAS or target CPA in this case. They will automatically adjust your bids based on a number of different signals. Among audiences is one of them. Okay, so let's head down to our next segment. So now we've covered RLSA. We'll be going into our newest, or one of the newest audience segments from sort of a Google perspective, and that's in markets for search ads. In markets stands for, or basically means that we categorize people based on their user behavior on various platforms when they are in commercial research phase. So a distinction would be somebody who's interested in cars and somebody who's interested in buying a car, or interested in buying or purchasing a car loan. And with machine learning, we're trying to distinguish these patterns. And it is a sort of a segment or an audience list that comes into the sort of consideration phase, where we try to qualify users which are actively researching or intending to buy. And this is a Google audience, which means that you can use it straight from Google Ads. You don't need to do any tagging on your site, and it's open for all to use. And there are over 500 different segments available. This is a screenshot for how it looks like in Google Ads. If you head into the campaign tab, then into audience, you'll be able to look into this screen. And where I've marked here in red is where you find the different in-market segments that you can try out. And if you don't have an idea of what in-market segments would work for you, you can always head into an functionality called Audience Insights. And Audience Insights is a functionality in Google Ads where you go into a pre-made audience list that you might have created, an RLSA list, for instance. And then you can dig sort of deeper into what the user group consists of. So in this case, the audience list that I've looked into has an overrepresentation of electrician services. So a group of users who are interested in electrician services. They are 37.3 times overrepresented in that group, which says something about for instance, in this group, they were converters last 365 days. So it says something about the people who purchase from you. So if you should take one action from this session, head into Google Ads and look into Audience Insights to learn more about your audiences. Going into our last product, which is similar audiences for search, which is a lookalike segment. Google is looking into your current audience segments and then trying to find users with similar patterns. And this is done through machine learning. So we're looking at patterns of the large lists. There is a limit. Sometimes we can't find similar audiences because usually the sizes are so small, or your audience lists are limited. But when we find sufficient volumes, then we can produce similar audience lists. And these are created automatically. So they are based on your existing audience lists within their count, and we automatically generate them. It's important to know that if we call the lists that are already in there, we call them seed lists. So the similar audiences that are created, they are excluded from the seed list. So a user won't be in both all converters 365 days and similar to all converters 365 days. And this is an important distinction, given if you are looking to grow your brand and grow your customer base, you want to reach to new customers that hasn't purchased for you before. from you before, then it's important to know that the users within these similar audience lists are not represented in the seed list. And a best practice for similar audiences. More data provides better patterns for the machine learning algorithms. Usually 540-day lists, which has collected data for a long period of time, provides good patterns. It's the same that applies to that if you apply them on campaign level, that will sort of trickle down on your ad groups. And activate with smart bidding again. That's another best practice that goes throughout audiences, I would say, and all audience products. And a common misconception is that you should avoid applying audience lists that are sort of performing worse than your KPI. That might be true when you are doing manual adjustments. However, when working with automation, you should notice that a wide variety of data pools are important to provide as good context to the bidding algorithm as possible. So, for instance, a non-performing list is as valuable as a well-performing list in terms of decision making, because that will give the automated bidding a good base of decision making of what not to bid for. So if you are using smart bidding, that will take bad performance into consideration as well. So don't keep that data out of smart bidding, but apply it as well, because that gives more nuance to the bidding. So heading down to some key recommendations then. Always collect data with consent. I think this is more important now than ever. And I think it's important to have in mind that users will likely be more demanding in the future about what you or other actors out there use their data for. Legislation is also becoming more strict and conservative. So you need to be pretty clear on what value you are providing and how your services will be better with user data. Segment audiences by the customer journey. I touched upon that initially, like a best practice. If you haven't set up your tracking and audience list yet, start by following your customer journey, because that will provide a good basis of intent, everything from somebody visiting your site down to conversions and everything there in between. Start simple with RLSA to re-engage hot leads. I think this is the most lower funnel activity in terms of audiences. Like you are using RLSA is usually it's a re-engagement activity, whereas similar audiences is reaching new users. And looking into sort of closing business and closing opportunities, you should always start with RLSA and then expand upwards throughout in-market segments and similar audiences. Expand and test performance. I think when you have your RLSA structure in place and your strategy, it's good to expand and test the performance specifically in market segments, given that they are already there in the account and you're available to use that off the bat. And then let smart bidding solve the complexity. I think working with bid modifiers and with manual bidding is getting outdated, and it takes a lot of time in comparison to sort of the marginal effect that you will get. Smart bidding or automated bidding, that's the same functionality. We call target CPA and target ROAS smart bidding. That's our sort of label for both of those. And that really solves for a lot of complexity in terms of what to bid for and why, and use a variety of different signals, much more than you can handle as a person. Cool. I think that's the recommendations. And now we are heading into Q&A. And we are now stopping the recording for the Q&A for your information. Perfect. Thank you all very much for watching, and there is a new Hangouts on Air session coming up soon, so stay tuned. Thank you.